Yes. And she said what really turned me around was the holidays came along and people kept coming in and saying, "Oh, this piece of bread, this piece of this loaf of challah, or this French bread that you made for my Christmas Eve dinner. This is part of our tradition, and I cannot imagine having my holiday without bread that you guys are making and having breaking bread with my family around the table that came from your shop." I mean, how wonderful is that? Who wouldn't want to hear that in whatever job that they have? So, yes, it's hard. And, yes, you feel like you've sunk everything into X, Y, or Z. But again, and I will say this until people turn me off, you have one shot at this. You have one trip around this planet. And why would you spend a single moment of it not having joy in your life? You've got to figure out a way for yourself to find that thing that brings you happiness. And I'm not talking about constant happiness. Nobody has that. But
No,
it's not worth it to stay in anything that is making you miserable.
absolutely.
Don't do it.
Absolutely. On a personal note, right after 9/11, the communications world was just crumbling in a lot of areas. We were shooting a lot of stock photographs at the time, and our agency was sold to a much larger entity at the time, Corbis, and we just saw our income drop by about 80% that year. And
Wow.
things were just crumbling around us. And while a number of my friends who are photographers were just, they kept picking their phone up and looking at it saying, well, there's a dial tone, but it doesn't ring anymore. So during that time, we had just bought a farm, and we were growing food for us because we just enjoyed it as a hobby. So we just kind of dug into it, pun intended or not, and started growing more, and had friends said, well, if you've got excess, we'll buy it. So we started a farmer's market in a town close by, and for 5 years, we farmed full time.
Wow.
And just walked away from communications almost altogether. I did a few assignments here and there, but 99% of my time was in digging in dirt, planting, and raising animals.
Oh, I love that.
And entirely walked away. But I tell folks that, at the time, first of all, I found it very embarrassing if a client or somebody that knew me walked up in the farmer's market, and a couple of people did, and they'd look at me and say, what are you doing?
Yep.
And I felt like, I'm like just a farmer. I'm just this low thing. That's not what I used to be. But much like the story of the baker, we had people that would invite us to their homes for birthday parties, and we became a part of their lives. We became their farmers, and we were integrated into their lives in ways that only one of my communications or photography clients had ever done. It just felt so rich and rewarding to feel like we were contributing in a way that I had never contributed doing commercial work before.
Yes.
So when we decided to return to what we call our urban work.
Oh, I love that.
Decided to shift back into this world. The lessons I learned there in terms of not only marketing, but personal relationships and the kind of impact we wanted to have has radically shifted the way that we work, who we work with, the values that we now take into all of our discovery process with our clients have all changed because of that experience. I'd gotten burned out doing a lot of the assignments I was doing. So when I came back into doing communications and visual work, I had an entirely new love and passion for it, and I still do. And I believe had it not been for that, that shift or that turn, I would have probably burned out and quit and not come back with the love that I have. So kind of as that little turn there, but it shifted radically our whole view of how we wanted to live our lives and incorporate what we did in the lives of other people. To have a more integrated life.
I love that story, and I wish I had it in the book now. I love that. I want to share with you, if you'll indulge me just for a moment.
Please.
I got an email just in the last week from someone who heard me on another podcast. And she is a millennial. She just graduated from college in May. And she, 3 weeks after graduation, landed a full-time job in a career that she had studied in. She talks about how she felt this pressure to start a career in the corporate world. She says, college gave me the idea that I shouldn't do anything else or anything less. And then she says, before college, I really wanted to go to school to be a hairdresser, but that seemed beneath me. Looking back, I was so concerned about how everyone would look at me if I was a hairstylist for the rest of my life. And I almost lost that dream because I feared others' reactions. Only after working at my quote unquote real job for 3 months, I did what my mentors at school told me never to do, and I quit. I was miserable all 3 months there and couldn't make sense of why I was sticking something out that made me toss and turn every night.
Wow.
And you know what she's doing now, Charles? She's going to beauty school. I love
Good
it.
on her.
And it's like, yes, right? I mean, she has already learned this lesson so much earlier than the rest of us. I mean, we take way too long to learn this lesson.
Wow.
That, if you've got something that you want to do, you should do it. And this is my favorite line from her email to me. She says, people seem to get lost in their careers and forget about what's really important. And it's so true. It's so easy to do. There are all these expectations that we place on ourselves in terms of what success looks like. There are so many expectations that we think others have of us, or maybe not even think. I mean, there are all the expectations that parents often put on their children for their life to look like, again, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, they're very real.
And they're very real. And I understand that. But what I would like to see out of all this is, I mean, we just need a more compassionate society that values joy and meaningfulness above all the rest of the BS that we seem to value. And I know that that's a lot to ask for that kind of change, but just because society is telling you your career should look one way doesn't mean that it's within your power and actually incumbent upon you.
It is.
To do something different.
And the earlier, the better.
The earlier, the better. Yeah. And, I think this woman who wrote to me, this new college grad, I think she is reflective of that generation. People, I don't know how old you are. I'm 46, and people of my generation, Gen Xers, we, along with the generations before us, were taught, oh, you need to stay in a job for several years so it doesn't look like you're hopping around on your resume. Well, these kids who are in their 20s now, they're hopping around every 18 months or 2 years.
I think it's getting to the point that if you're not hopping early enough and fast enough, it shows that you're not a go-getter, that you're not learning, you're not growing fast in a lot of people's eyes.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that. And I love that that's changing. I hope that they change the whole paradigm of what a career means and what a career is supposed to look like and what success in that career is supposed to look like. Because it's kind of looked the same way ever since, basically post World War II. And I think we've had enough of that. We've had enough of that idea that you got to stay in the same thing for 30, 40 years. I mean, for one thing, you don't get a pension to retire anymore. So that's off the table. And for second thing, there is no more loyalty coming from corporate America anymore. So why should you only send that loyalty one way? There's a lot to be said for variety. Yes, there's a lot to be said for, gaining experience and having an expertise that comes after, only doing something for a very long time. But I also think that there's a lot to be said for variety and for, giving yourself the space to do something different. And I love that this millennial generation seems to be doing that on its own. And I hope that they push all the rest of us in the same direction.
Well, we have a lot to learn. I mean, the reason for starting this podcast is I had an interest in audio because having moved from stills into motion, I learned that audio, really good audio, was the foundation of good films, good videos, good motion work. So I wanted to study it more. And the show started out as a motion piece. I started interviewing people and filming them, but realized it was going to limit my reach to talk with folks like you that are across the country. And so as I started to shift over and think of doing an audio only show, I was really intimidated because that's a whole new skill set. And I thought, I got to learn this stuff. And I don't want to allow my fears to limit my growth and my interest. It was something I wanted to do, but I think that for a lot of us, we start looking at those things and thinking, well, it's imposter syndrome. Who am I to be doing this? I can't do that because everyone knows me as a photographer, or everyone knows me as a corporate finance person. I can't become a baker or a farmer or an Indian chief or whatever.
No, it's true, and I think that is another thing that keeps people from really making a jump, a leap beyond just going and taking another job in the career that you already have. I talk in the book about that there are kind of two ways that you can go. One is to step down the ladder that you've already been on, especially if you're up near the top, like I was. It was there were very, very few places I could have gone that would have been, higher up on my own career ladder than where I already was.
Right.
So for me, the question was, do I step down a few rungs? Am I willing to do that in order to have a different experience, go do something different, maybe at a member station instead of on a national level? Or do I go into management instead of reporting, or whatever it is? Or do I go back to reporting instead of anchoring? All of which would be, from the outside, steps down on the ladder I was already on. Or do I just leave the ladder and completely start over on a new one? And, even contemplating that, kind of again, like Christy the baker in Minnesota, you start thinking, well, I can't do that. I'm not going to be good at that. How could I be? Because there are so many other people who are more qualified than I am. Well, that may be true, but you still may be the best person for that job.
Right.
And that whole notion of imposter syndrome is, boy, is it real. Boy, is it real. And it is so hard to push against.
Yes, it is.
But maybe it makes it a little easier when you realize that the vast majority of your fellow human beings feel the same way. And I mean, when you were telling me earlier about how, you weren't really great with audio, and yet you were talking to me, the reporter person, what I said to you was, I actually had people who did that for me. So, I'm an imposter even when it comes to some of this audio stuff. So, you never know. You never know what's going to come your way if you just pursue something different. And I guess what you've learned and what I learned through this process over the last 3 years or so is that it's worth taking that first step onto whatever that new road is. And you may fail. You may fail miserably.
In a sense, you hope you do a little bit, because that indicates you're trying things, you're growing, you're doing something. If you never stumble at all, you're really not pushing yourself to grow out of any comfort at all.
Yes. And it also teaches you what maybe you're not good at. And I would rather know that and not spend more time pursuing it or dreaming about it. I would rather know that I'm not good at something, and move on to whatever the next thing would be.
I have a mantra over my desk that says action brings clarity. When people often are asking, what should I do? One of the most important lessons is finding out what you should not do and getting that out of the way. And by just taking action, starts bringing more clarity to what you should do.
Yes.
The faster you find that out, the faster you get to, again, what you should be doing.
Yeah, to what's really going to turn you on.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, speaking of changing directions, as I'm broadening my interest from visual into audio, you've been expanding your talents, your thoughts, your interests from audio into photography.
I'm trying.
So I want to talk a little bit about that, but also I want to hear some of the stories that you witnessed during your trip to Peru with your dad
Oh,
and how
yeah.
they affected you. I want to, because that's an area that you are growing in and where that's leading you to, both visually,
Sure.
some of the stories that have come out of there. Where is it going?
Well,